I am here today with Susette Magana, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice in Long Beach, California. And I'm very honored to have her here with me today because she not only suffers from PCOS, but she actually helps with depression and anxiety. And that's so important because we notice that with PCOS, it's not just a physical component. It's actually, a lot of it is mental. So we have to look at how best can we really help ourselves with the depression and anxiety that comes with PCOS, and especially going through fertility treatment. So she is going to share with you some really powerful jewels today on how to get through infertility as well as cope with the depression and anxiety that comes along with it. So welcome, Susette. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on here with you today.
Great. I was just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about your practice and what you focus on.
So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, which in California is like the pretty standard master's degree for being a therapist. I've been in private practice for 5 years. Actually, just in the next couple days, I'll be celebrating my 5-year anniversary. And I know, yay, that's a good milestone. And I work a lot with clients that are going through anxiety symptoms, and I have training in trauma. One of my specialties is working with clients who have been through betrayal and the trauma and anxiety that comes with the loss of what they thought their relationship was or their life was. And so we work a lot with anxiety and grief. And so with my personal experience with PCOS and infertility, I've done a lot of that work, a lot of anxiety management work throughout the process of all of these things that, we're not able to control. And then also a lot of grief work over the course of infertility.
And it's interesting you bring up betrayal, because I feel like that comes up so much when, okay, why isn't my body working? Why isn't it doing what it's supposed to do? And a lot of our patients, and I felt this coming through myself, is just like the frustration, but also like betrayal of your body when you become pregnant as well, or even just going through a fertility cycle. Like, how come I'm not getting to where I'm supposed to be at this point?
Yes. So. And, I hated the cliche of the biological clock, but I was diagnosed with PCOS right when I started to begin trying to have kids. And I was in my early 30s. So, it started to tick and tick and tick. And so betrayal definitely comes alongside of that feeling of like, I've never had problems with this before. What's my issue? And now this is coming up right when I need you, ovaries. Now you're betraying me, And there's also a feeling of betrayal with if you're married and if you're going through infertility. It's almost like your body is betraying your spouse too, because you don't know what's happening and all you know is this isn't working. So a lot of those feelings can come up. And when I speak of betrayal, it's more of an emotion than a reality. I think we're not actually betraying our spouse, but that feeling can come up, and all of the grief that comes up with betrayal.
And can you tell me a little bit more about how you found out that you had PCOS, or when did you know?
So I was, I believe, 32 or almost 32, and I had been trying to get pregnant probably for about 9 months. And so I went to a doctor and she ran through some symptoms work for me. And that's where I was diagnosed with it. I didn't have a lot of information about it. I just knew that there was a hormonal issue, and she ran my blood work, and all of the signs pointed to PCOS, even though I didn't have any cysts. And it was really confusing. It brought up a lot of shame for me about weight. I've struggled with weight and weight loss for all of my adult or adolescent life. And so it brings up shame about that. Oh, it's because I gained weight. I threw my body off of balance, and now it's interfering with my future. And so from that time, that was 2012, I've experienced infertility since that time. It's been at least on the books infertility at that time. And so that's 5-6 years. And I've gone through some miscarriages, and we're actually starting the process of IVF right now. And so it's been a lot of ups and downs, and not knowing what my body's doing, not being able to be consistent with my moods and my reactions to things emotionally, because the my hormones have been off over the course of time. And I've gone through a lot of time over the last 5 years of, working on my diet and going paleo, and then not, and then I'd get pregnant, and then I'd have to get off paleo, and then just, a lot of, and then I'd lose the baby, and then I couldn't get back on paleo because I was grieving and blah, blah. So there's a lot, it's very cyclical, going through infertility with PCOS is cyclical, and then it's not because you can't depend on your ovaries to produce the appropriate amount of hormones in order to maintain a good cycle, So.
And not only going through infertility, but also the losses. I'm really sorry to hear about that. And it just adds to the struggle, because it's not over when you have that positive pregnancy test. It's really the start of everything. Right. So, getting through each appointment, takes a lot of work emotionally and a lot of strength. So I am just really impressed with just your level of strength. Just even to go through an IVF cycle, it can be really tough alone.
Oh, it's killing me.
Yeah.
And my husband.
So it's good to have a system in place. And I know that, you're kind of in the chair now, but when you have other people on the side, they're coming into your office and asking you for advice about getting, I guess, some good tips on relieving anxiety and depression, what would you say has worked the best?
Well, I think that the place to start with anxiety, for me, anxiety is a very overwhelming group of symptoms. And it's easy for us to, the more anxious we feel, the more anxious we feel about it, right? It's a snowball that tumbles down the hill. So where I start with anxiety with clients is talking about physical symptoms, because there's something about coming out of this fear that we can't name, and what's happening to my body with this anxiety. And it's more about coming in and saying, okay, what's happening with your heart rate? What's happening with your stomach? Is it nervous? Do you have chest pressure, chest pain? Do you have headaches? And so when I start to measure those symptoms for my clients, we actually have a good foundation to start with, and then it gives them a grounding of where to start, so that they can measure their own symptoms, and it demystifies anxiety a lot. So.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we look at it on the level of excitement. It could be a same feeling, but it's a negative connotation of it, it's, and so sometimes how do we rephrase it and say, you have excitement about this procedure coming up instead of anxiety?
Totally. And I think, there's something that's cool about identifying it physically is that you can soothe it physically, So if I know that I wake up, one of my big anxiety symptoms, especially on procedure days, is waking up with a really nervous stomach, and I just have a lot of stomach stuff around with anxiety, and have my whole life. So I know if I wake up with a nervous stomach, I have these things that I can do physically for myself. So much about anxiety is that I can't control my future. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm really nervous about this because I don't know the future. And so there's something about being able to control the symptom itself, or begin to manage it. So, I can manage my food that day. I can eat a banana instead of toast, or I can not drink coffee until my stomach settled a little bit, or eat crackers or whatever. And then that helps me it gives me the confidence that at least I can manage my symptom if I can't manage what's happening in the world around me, and there's ways to do that on all sorts of levels. So you can do the same thing with your thinking. You can choose to tame what's happening that day, and the fear of what's happening that day, by thinking about it and looking at a hopeful option, So if you're really overwhelmed and stressed about what this procedure today might happen, you can think about the aftermath of it, and that you're taking control of your health and your fertility, and you're trying to move forward in that way. So there's ways to talk through it. Talking to somebody that you trust is something that really releases endorphins. It makes you feel like you are important in the world, and that's what therapy offers. Hopefully, that's what my therapy offers. Is that the person sitting in front of me, and I care about them, and I keep all of their stuff that they don't want to share private. That's legally I have to, and I sit in front of them, look them in the eye, and show them unconditional care throughout the course of them feeling all of these feelings. And that's like the foundation of therapy, and that should be the foundation of anxiety management too, is like having someone in front of you that you can talk to, that you can get comfort from, physical comfort and emotional.
It's so important. I really do recommend a lot of times for our patients to see a therapist if they've been struggling with losses, struggling with fertility issues, and PCOS, so many things. It's a lot to keep inside, and your partner sometimes is really helpful, but they just don't know how to actually relate
Very
sometimes.
true.
And they do feel a sense of helplessness too. We do see the partners as well with our acupuncture treatment sometimes, and they're just like, "Well, I just wish I could do something, but I can't." So really, that's like making them a part of this experience. Sometimes I think it's really important too, and sometimes they also need to have a little bit of a chat with a therapist as well.
Absolutely.
And we ignore them a lot, but I think it's important,
Yeah, and groups too. Sitting with other people that understand your struggle and where there's good rules within a group where they can keep it confidential and keep it safe. I think that you're right. Talking to people outside of your partner is a really important thing, because the partner's invested in the issue as well, and they have their own feelings, and it is hard to roll with all of the ups and downs. I was thinking yesterday about how my husband is being a champ right now and being so patient.
Yay!
And he's really good at being patient. But that skill is being tested right now, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Often I think we underestimate going in to any fertility type treatment. It could be IUI, IVF, even trying naturally. Everything is just hinged on that one result. So it's like, literally putting your eggs in one basket. Really, it was a horrible pun, but really, and oftentimes they say, well, is there anything else we should be doing? So I would like to know if you could give one piece of advice to someone, a couple, or someone struggling with PCOS, what would it be?
I think it's important to trust the process of recovery and understand that PCOS is a hormonal imbalance, but it feels very holistic as something that when you have it, so it is about health and exercise and emotional reaction. Like it just almost everything that I go through day to day, I can tie to my PCOS, and so I think if I have one piece of advice, I'm horrible at breaking things down to one thing. But I think if I have one piece of advice, it's to trust the process and keep walking through it, and also give yourself grace if you fail one day. Then I'm thinking about like how much I've struggled with diet. My diet is the thing that does improve my symptoms, but I'm also an emotional eater. So how do I balance like that? Sometimes I need comfort. How do I find that comfort in other avenues that are better for me in the long run, but also on those days that I struggle and I fail, giving myself grace and resetting and anteing back up and getting back in there,
Right. None of us are perfect, and you're never going to be completely 100% with whatever you're following. 80% is always a good thing to strive for.
That's a good number, right? Yeah. And shame is a big part of this process too. And shame is something that demotivates us. So let's say I have a weekend of binge, eating with lots and lots and lots of wheat and sugar. On those, if I experience shame from that and I feel, well, what's the point? I just might as well give up. I've been struggling with this for years and blah, 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 and I just say, forget it. I'm done trying here. I can be overwhelmed with a feeling of shame, and then that will demotivate me to keep moving forward. So the behavior that I have, it just demotivates me. And then I give up. And that happens so often with addiction. That happens so often with emotional eating. You just, at some point you go, well, this isn't doing me any good anyway, and I'm not seeing the progress that I want. And so why am I even trying? It's important, I think, to keep pushing and resist the shame feeling that comes. We all have to resist shame. It's a part of being a person. And so resisting that shame and finding hope in something. It's been important for me not to find hope in my infertility struggle. It's been important for me to not find hope in the fact that I just know it's going to happen one day. I just know I'm going to have a baby one day. That's something that does not help me. And it's actually, of all the things that makes me angry, like everybody has their triggers, right? When they're struggling with infertility, of things that they don't want people to tell them, or it's going to upset them. And I can deal with almost all of the things that people would say that's well-intentioned, but ends up being jerky, but for me, like, that's the thing that gets to me, is I don't want to hear, I just know you're going to have a baby one day. I just know it's going to happen. Or like in my, coming from a faith-based community, like, I just know God's going to give you the desires of your heart, is the thing that people say. And I don't know that, and that can't be part of my hope, because that's not something that is promised to me. And so I can do all that I can, and I can move forward and keep plugging ahead with all of the effort that I have, but I can't predict the future, so I really need to be trusting and hoping in something else. So that's been something that's brought me a lot of comfort in my infertility struggle. Nothing else does. Not knowing that God's going to bring me the desires of my heart, that does not bring me any comfort. That just makes me angry at God and at the people that say it. Most of the people.
Yeah. And I think it's like they're coming from a place of good intention, but
Totally.
it's sometimes they're not sure like how to put it into words. And that's happened quite a bit. I know it just, and they're trying to comfort you in some way,
and
but
failing.
There's, yes, not succeeding with it. So we need a t-shirt.
Yeah. And so we didn't, you asked me about anxiety and depression, and we didn't talk about the depression part, but when I think of depression symptoms, for me, it's been more about grief. So depression is, you have very, very sad symptoms that demotivate you and interfere with your sleep, interfere with your eating, interfere with your ability to experience pleasure over the course of like 2 weeks, is like how we diagnose depression for therapists. But the sadness that I've experienced over the course of 5 years has been something that I've been moving in and out of, and I've been moving in and out of really grief stages of sadness and anger, mostly those two. And so going back to like when people say things that hurt me, even when they're well-intentioned and trying hard to help, that's where I get to be angry, which is kind of nice. So anger, you feel powerful when you feel anger in those moments. And so there's so much of this process where you feel powerless that I like to grab onto that for a minute, not in a way where I'm like yelling at anybody or like, acting out or anything, but it's just nice to kind of feel like, no, that's not what I need to hear. And then being able to teach somebody how to comfort me in the process, like it empowers me. So, so grief is another part of this. And grief to me is all about, they've taught about the 5 stages of grief for years, and it's not quite as clean and pretty as that. Have you guys talked about grief at all?
This is actually the first time that we were getting into it. So I wanted to, and the 5 stages of grief are really important, I think, just to go through when you get diagnosed with PCOS. I think a lot of people go through that.
Absolutely. Should I hit them? Should I hit the 5 stages?
Sure, let's do it.
I always forget one of 5 whenever I'm going off the top of my head, so we'll remember together. DABDA, I did not write this down. I'm doing it off the top of my head. So denial is the first one, and then anger, and then bargaining, and then depression, and then acceptance. So those are the 5 stages. And, there's a lot of research right now that it's not quite as clean and pretty as you're just moving through the stages one at a time. But how the 5 stages of grief have benefited me in my work with clients and in my own life is it's helpful for me to be able to identify the emotions that I'm feeling, and knowing that emotions are not good or bad. They just are. And that's why understanding anxiety in your body, in symptoms in your body, is helpful, because I can't feel guilty about a stomach ache. If I just think I'm anxious in my head, then I can feel guilty and weak. But if my stomach hurts, there's no, the proof is in the pudding. What am I going to do about it? My stomach hurts. And so I'm able to accept that emotion for what it is and not feel guilty about it, resist that feeling of guilt or that feeling of, oh, I'm weak, I shouldn't be feeling this feeling. So with the grief stages, it's a very similar process. As you're moving through a stage like anger, you can look at it and say, okay, well, at least I'm moving into acceptance. I'm moving down the road towards accepting that this is my new reality, which is a really important part of this process. And it's an important part of life, is that we have these expectations that we thought were going to be a part of our life. And when it doesn't happen, we have to grieve the expectation and move forward in the new reality. And if we don't do that, we can get stuck and not move forward. And then we just kind of loop through a cycle, and it doesn't help us. So for me, if I'm not managing my grief symptoms, and I'm talking about after a miscarriage, of course I feel grief. Of course I feel loss. But also just when I see my friends' babies playing, and I look at that life and I go, man, I really, really want to be a mom. Even though that might be in my future, I get to grieve it now. And so I get to feel feelings of anger and sadness and trying to negotiate and bargain. And maybe I live in denial. I actually do. I live in denial a lot. And I just say, I'm just going to focus on my career, and then I move back through the cycle. Like, one thing about IVF that's been really difficult for me in the last month is that I can't live in denial. Like, I haven't been doing any treatment. I've just been trying to balance my diet for the last year or so. And we've just been saving money for IVF because it's crazy. And so I haven't had to think about it much. I'm just working as hard as I can, and trying to start a podcast and trying to do business. And so once the first day I went into the IVF clinic to do my first, just a baseline blood draw, I cried in the clinic for 10 minutes. The poor admin staff, I don't even care, but I'm once you're in your mid 30s, I don't get embarrassed about that stuff anymore. But the poor admin staff, they didn't know what to do with me. And I'm just sitting there crying, because I finally had to face where I was in this moment. And so I had been in denial, which was benefiting me. It is what it is. I don't think I was doing anything wrong. But as I moved out of denial, then I started to grieve. And so just the whole cool thing about grief for me is that when I can recognize the stage for what it is, when I recognize the anger for what it is, then the anger at my friends for having beautiful kids, that doesn't destroy our relationship. I go, oh, I'm just grieving. I need a minute, or I need to spend some time away from them for a day or two and just feel the feelings. When people pop up pregnant on Facebook, I get to feel so empowered just to take them out of my newsfeed. And then I bring them back in.
And the same with baby showers, I think, too. I tell our patients, you could tell them that, you really at this moment cannot be there and be present. It's okay. You don't have to go. If you're not in that place, you don't have to go. And I think you have some control there when it comes to not necessarily self-preservation, but basically coping
Absolutely.
with what's going on.
Absolutely. And that's where the idea of grief can be beneficial too. You can know this is not a good week for me to go to a baby shower. It's not a good week for me to go to my friends, kids 1 year birthday party. It's not a good week for that. And, it's important, I think, not to isolate in this process and to keep engaging in other relationships. But I've been really fortunate to have a good friend who does not have any kids and, and runs her own business too. And so we get to lean into each other's lives and, celebrate what we have together, And so I think it's really important if you're surrounded by if you're going through infertility and you're surrounded by people that are going through the process of having kids and becoming moms and all that, maintaining those relationships are important. Also with boundaries though, where you're taking care of yourself if you can't go to certain parties or whatever, but also building a network of relationships that don't have to do with fertility or kids too. That's really important. Whether that's like making a friend with a woman who's already raised her kids and is empty nesting, and you guys become homies, and then you can share like this life of freedom that moms don't have. Anyway. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to manage those things. And I think acknowledging the anxiety, the grief, the sadness, and all of that, and accepting it, but also soothing it, and then moving past it is a really important part of this process.
Wow, acknowledging the grief, that is key, yes. And then that kind of also frees you from the guilt, I believe. Yes. And I have a lot of resources, especially from the faith-based perspective, on like prayers and stuff too. So if that's something that's helpful, people can always reach out to me and I'll send them stuff. So great. Yeah. We would love to post that, and we'll definitely put that on our website. And any kind of piece of advice, parting wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Just keep pushing, I guess. It's so holistic that, there's almost always something that you can do to fight this process, whether it's what you eat today or managing your stress or going to that next doctor's appointment and not avoiding it. There's always something you can do. So I think keeping moving is a really important part of this.
Well, thank you so much, Susette, and we wish you all the best with your upcoming cycle, and our thoughts are with you, definitely, for this process. So, and I really appreciate you sharing your experiences, and especially from a therapist perspective as well. Everybody struggles, and I think that the takeaway is that it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to reach out. Whether it be, your network or your therapist or your friends and family, it's just okay to lean on other people.
It's important
during this time.
Yeah.
Yes, and essential.
Yeah, it's essential. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, and all the best to everybody listening today. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.